to this second day of the conference. Unfortunately, Theodore Terzopoulos, who also chairs IANE's Natural Gas Committee, Scientific Committee, was not able to join us today due to a small medical examination he had to undertake, nothing serious. So he asked me to chair this on his behalf. I wish to welcome our speakers, two of which are here today physically. Gina Cohen, very well known to everybody, well-known analyst, energy and gas in particular from Israel. And Nicholas Satras, who is also very well known in our energy community. He heads Motor Oil's gas program, among other things. And we are joined by Dr. James Watson from Eurogas in Brussels, Dr. Michael Thomadakis, who is going to join us online. And then finally, we're going to have Andrei Konoplyanik from Moscow, who is the advisor to the Director General at Gazprom. So we have five really top speakers, top experts with us to discuss the current crisis and the global and regional gas markets. So over the last few weeks, the gas crisis has peaked in a way. We've seen prices which we were not, we could not imagine, I'd say, 12 months ago. There are several reasons for this. Some of the speakers yesterday analyzed these reasons. Today, we're going to go more deeply into gas. Gas is a key determining factor for the rest of the energy market, electricity, gas itself, but also long-term contracts, and it affects government policy. So gas, although it covers a small part of the energy mix compared to other sources, its importance in electricity is paramount, and also its importance in terms of investment decisions is is key, absolutely, and it interacts with everything else. So gas is central to our energy environment. And I will not say further on this than ask Dr. James Watson, who is the Secretary General of Eurogas in Brussels. Eurogas is the association of gas companies in Europe. And James has done an excellent work organizing this association. He's the real, it's not a lobby, Eurogas, it's something more than that. So anyway, I won't say more. I will ask James to join us.
Any problem with the sound, just let me know, and I will be happy to try again. But I think that it's working for the time being. So I think that it's important that we understand the basis of why we have faced such high prices for energy in Europe. And indeed, an understanding of why the European Commission has launched a toolbox to try to address these issues. From our point of view, it's very clear that we are moving from a system in Europe which was based on what I call deterministic power, i.e. power that was always there, power that was produced on a constant basis, a sort of base load, if you will, which was supported with nuclear and coal, and of course, natural gas. As we've seen in the last few years, though, in the last 10 years, the European Commission's policies around renewable energy have driven a large increase. I mean, it's up to about 20% now of variable renewables, mainly wind and solar. And so in the end, we've moved from a kind of deterministic approach to energy production to a stochastic approach, which means that we have less control over when energy is produced and how it can therefore be consumed. Now, I've spoken at great length to our colleagues in the Wind Europe Association, similar to Eurogas, but one that represents the wind interests. And they've told me that wind power has remained relatively constant this year, rather than some people who said that it's fallen. That's in a comparison to last year. And I completely understand that you can say, yes, the wind has stayed the same. However, in Europe, demand did not stay the same because last year we had a pandemic and there was very little industrial requirement for power. This year, our economy has bounced back into action. We have inflation running at about 3 to 4 to 5% in some countries because the economy has come back, which meant the demand has increased. And unfortunately, stochastic production cannot match demand. And thus, we have a shortfall. It's easy to say that it's the fault of the renewables, but I don't think that's really what the message can be. Only that the renewables produce what they produce, and they can't produce more because you can't make the wind blow. So gas has been required to fill very large gaps in the electricity demand of Europe. And it is the electricity demand that has driven demand for gas. I can assure you that all of the long-term contracts that have been signed in Europe have been honored. If there had been no massive resurgence and no problem with increasing electricity from renewable sources, then there would have been no demand for gas going into power. But that isn't the case in the system that we have created. Gas has had to come in to keep the lights on. Gas has been keeping the lights on across Europe. But there is a cost. There is a certain amount of supply. And of course, this year, lots of maintenance work was carried out that was actually basically postponed from the pandemic year of 2020. And this doesn't just apply to Russia, it applies also to Algeria, it applies also to Norway. It applies to many of the countries that we import our piped gases from. And at the same time, as the global economy has boomed post-pandemic, LNG from the United States and other parts of the world has not found the shores of Europe. It has gone to China. It's gone to Brazil, where they've experienced a lack of rainfall, and so their hydroelectricity did not function this year, and so they have required gas. If you will, gas has been supporting all of the economies of the world to keep the lights on and keep industry moving. But of course, when you have limited supply, it means that there is, of course, price pressure. And we see that in the markets, and ultimately we see that, of course, as demand is high and supply is somehow constrained, because you can only produce so much, and then of course prices have risen. And I suppose this is an existential threat really to the way that we are envisaging the energy transition, with a greater reliance on these variable, intermittent, stochastic renewables, whichever way you want to look at it. And I think that in the past few years, we've probably underestimated the need for gas in Europe, because gas is going to be absolutely vital at these moments to keep the lights on, to keep people warm, to keep cooking their food. And I think that that is one of the things that has been overlooked. And investments in gas have not kept up with the pace, perhaps, of the demand that is needed for gas to get us through this transition. I believe that there is now a better understanding of the role that gas will play because of this crisis with the policymakers here in Brussels. I think they now understand that the direction they wish to go in is not possible without a transition that involves a significant amount of gas. In fact, the European Commission's own projections to 2030 suggest a very, very small reduction in the amount of natural gas that will be consumed in Europe. And I believe that that is also because they understand that gas will be vital to partner the renewable electricity that they wish to deploy. I think that this also means that they understand even better that you need to make sure that you have the right framework in place to deal with this energy transition that must support the use of natural gas alongside renewables. So I move into the next stage of the energy price crisis, if I may. And after we can say that these are some of the, and I won't say that that's an exhaustive list of the reasons that we had it, but that's some of the main ones that I've covered. I will say that then we go on into a discussion of what happens next. Well, back in October, the European Commission brought out its toolbox. Basically, in Eurogas, we could broadly support most of the ideas that were in that toolbox because a lot of the examples of the policies that they wanted to introduce, such as no disconnections for vulnerable consumers, price management for some of the consumers, are all social policy. That's not energy policy. This is actually just the protection of the vulnerable members of society. And it's not really to do with energy. This is about making sure that people don't lose warmth and comfort in their homes. And so it would be inhuman not to support such things. And so in Eurogas, we very clearly recognize the need to support the vulnerable consumers. We think also that it was acceptable that the European Commission are looking into issues such as storage. We also think that it's acceptable that they are looking into things such as the functioning of the market. Is the market performing correctly? Does the electricity market perform correctly? Does the CO2 market perform correctly? These are all questions they've asked ACER to assess. And so in our point of view, this toolkit made sense. I will now touch on some of those points that I mentioned in a bit more detail. One thing that we think that was missing was probably a recognition of the value of long-term contracts. We think that there's been probably too fast to move away from long-term contracts, and actually long-term contracts to mitigate against the volatility, if you will, as it is described continuously, of the market. Well, actually, it's a market that functions. But again, I'll come on to that in a minute. In the end, we think that probably long-term contracts are a useful tool to mitigate against excesses within the market. And we would like to see more recognition for the value of long-term contracts being brought forward once again. We think we will need gas, as I've already explained, for many, many years to come, decades. And therefore, it makes sense to have long-term contracts now, which can help us through these times where there will be more volatility in the markets as we become more dependent on stochastic production of electricity. And electricity demand for gas will spike at certain moments, and long-term contracts can help offset those spikes. So the first thing that we would say in Eurogas, which was probably missing, was this issue around long-term contracts. One other issue they suggested was to consider a common purchasing platform. It was all very well and good. We don't officially say that we don't support that. We are extremely skeptical, however, to understand how this could work. I remember Council President Donald Tusk bringing forward such ideas in 2014, considering buying gas from Azerbaijan. This never really happened because in the end, member states are responsible for their own energy mixes and for their own energy fortunes, if you will. And so it has not been a common and a successful approach to actually create such platforms. So we suspect that that's perhaps not the way that will be ultimately successful. There's also the issue of storage. And we know that the European Commission is considering looking at the Security of Supply Directive to try to increase the requirements of countries to have gas on store. In Eurogas, just to live to Costas's point, we're not only a lobbying outfit, we also do look at research. We have looked at the countries. There are 15 countries in Europe that have storage requirements, and there is no particular link between the functioning of the price of gas and storage. However, we do agree that storage provides a certain psychological support for countries and may also, on a psychological level, influence markets if there is storage. So in this regard, we are certainly not opposed to the idea that storage should perhaps be created more equally across Europe. But again, as I mentioned, this is up to the member states. So the European Commission will have to think carefully about how it wants to approach encouraging countries to set storage volumes. We do think that that's an acceptable approach, though, and that we don't see that there's any reason at this stage to get too excited. Of course, it depends on what the storage is used for. If storage is kept for security of supply, that's one thing. If storage is kept as a market reserve, i.e. to be released if prices rise, then that's a totally different matter, and we need to be very careful how the market will be impacted. And that brings me on to the final point in this little section I'm giving on the prices, and that's the market design. I think that only 2 years ago, ACER, the European regulators, issued a report which commended the functioning of the European gas market. In our opinion, in Eurogas, the gas market has continued to function. There is no market failure here. This is simply a reaction to demand and supply. That's what markets are for. It is a liquid market. It is improving. In Greece, you yourselves will open up your own markets with a trading platform, I should say, within the next year. I do believe, and I think Eurogas is very committed to this, that the market has functioned well. There's no two ways about that. And we think that ACER's review will continue to support that view. The electricity market, on the other hand, is something else. And I believe that ACER have already, in their preliminary report that was also released at the beginning of November, have suggested that further investigations will be needed into the electricity market and how it functions. And I do believe that as you change the production pattern in the electricity sector away from what I described as the deterministic, or as perhaps is more familiar to you, the baseload approach to power production, I believe they will have to look at how that market functions when you have stochastic and entirely variable and uncertain production of electricity. So I expect that through ACE's work, there will be more focus on the electricity market than there will be on the gas market. I will leave the CO2 market for the time being. As you all know, we're going into record prices, but that's probably a situation where more investigation will be undertaken as to how that market is functioning. I will end my speech only to say that it is, as usual, a great pleasure. And I was only a few weeks ago in Greece, also commending Greece and the Minister for Energy of Greece on how I see Greece as a role model for the energy transition. An increased speed up in the phase out of coal, this is to be commended. An increased amount of renewable electricity, this is also to be commended. And the partner to that, an increased consumption of natural gas. This is undoubtedly the best way to address the climate emergency with which we live. And I think that in the next decades, we will see that those countries that follow the Greek example will be the ones that are most successful in bringing their CO2 emissions down. Greece has increased its consumption of natural gas since about 2005. From 2007 to today, every year, CO2 emissions drop from Greece. This is a good example of a way to tackle the energy transition. I will also say that I believe that Greece will become a great hub for gas, pipelines plus LNG terminals. And in the future, I have been well informed by certainly members who are also on this panel today, Desfa and others, about the new White Dragon project. I won't say more about that because it's not my project, but it shows that Greece is also willing to lead in the new technologies that will come in, such as hydrogen. Kostas, thank you. I'm sure I've overrun my time, for which I'm truly apologetic, but I hope you found this useful and interesting to have the Eurogas insights on the current gas market situation. Thank you.
Several valid points, really very well prepared, and we see now a picture from Brussels covering the whole gas market, and that's very useful for us. Now, one or 2 points, and then we come back at the discussion at the end, but while you're here and the subject is very hot, you mentioned that there is an EU report, or in the EU predictions for the next years and decade, gas use in Europe as a whole shows to be a little lower than today. But here in Southeast Europe, not only in Greece, but in Bulgaria, in Romania, in the whole region, we've seen continuous growth of gas use. And the reason is very simple, is that these countries, gas, they are latecomers into gas, and therefore grids, distribution grids are still expanding. Greece has a big program, about approximately 1 billion over the next 10 years to expand its grid all over the country. Bulgaria is also in this phase, and other countries. North Macedonia, which is very little gas use, is going to see a lot more gas. We have countries in the region where they have no gas at all, like Albania, like Montenegro, like Kosovo. These are earmarked to get gas over the next 5 years. So in Southeast Europe, we see a completely different situation. We have gas expansion. And how is this going to balance at the end? I don't know, but your observation here would be very valuable.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Kostas. And yes, the European Commission's view is a pan-European view. But we see that basically from the Baltic Sea to the Aegean, there will be an increase in gas. Maybe that from Poland to Greece, Gdansk to Greece. There's no doubt in our mind that you will see and are seeing connections on the distribution grids running up to 100,000 at least new connections in Poland, in Romania, in Greece. And so from our point of view, yes, natural gas will, of course, continue to increase considerably in Central, Southeastern Europe. There's no doubt about that. And ironically, it's always focused on, it says that these are the areas that we will focus on gas growth. But to be honest, gas will also grow in Germany and in Brussels, where I'm living, here in Belgium, there is also a phase out of nuclear proposed, and the proposal is to replace nuclear with natural gas.
Yeah.
Because they want to put more renewables into the ground, and so more renewable electricity, I should say, into the ground, they want to balance that with natural gas. So it's not just a phenomenon of Central and Southeastern Europe. This is a phenomenon across Europe. Now, I quote the European Commission's report. Of course, Eurogas take a different view, and we actually see an increase over the period in the consumption of natural gas. And we believe that's entirely possible because we see Germany, we see Belgium, we see the region that you are representing, plus Central Europe, as becoming more, I should say, more open to the use of natural gas.
Okay.
And thus, in this respect, the challenge will be actually how we are going to bring forward the decarbonization of that gas. And that is what the real challenge will be, not for the next 10 years, but for the 10 or 20 years that come after that. So in this regard, we're fairly confident that the gas market will stay very robust in Europe.
One final point, because we move to the next. Yes, before we go to the next speaker, let me ask one, then Gina can do it. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, we had a joint seminar in Brussels, in your headquarters, and it was very well attended. And at that time, the sentiment in Europe, I mean, in the European Commission and various organizations, was so much against gas. I mean, gas was something that was moving out. And we could see this in decisions taken on investments. And am I right in thinking that this sentiment has changed somewhat?
I think that there is a certain degree of a shift, and I think it's also been greatly helped by the situation that we've faced in the last 3 or 4 months in Europe. I can assure you that the non-governmental organizations remain as fanatical as ever against gas, and perhaps increasingly so. But that's also as a reflection on the fact that I think that what you said is correct, that there is a growing understanding of the necessity of natural gas for this energy transition. Look, we have a green energy minister in Belgium, and the Germans will also have Greens in government, yet it is a green energy minister here in Belgium that is replacing nuclear with natural gas, and it is a green, part green government in Germany that will replace nuclear and coal with natural gas. The coalition agreement in Germany describes natural gas as indispensable for the energy transition. I think that probably 2 years ago when we had our meeting, Kostas, it would have been very hard to imagine you would have German Greens describing natural gas as indispensable. Yeah. So I believe your analysis is correct, and there is a certain growing understanding of the importance of natural gas for the energy transition.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Now, Gina wants to put a question to you.
Okay.
You said that one of the remedies could be long-term contracts, but since in Western Europe 95% of the long-term contracts are based on hub pricing, so how will long-term contracts help to get rid of the volatility in prices?
Well, we think that it's a good point, and I think that we see that the way that we would look at it is that indeed, they are related to hub prices, but not all of them are. And we do think that it should be possible also not to have long-term contracts that are only based on hub prices. We think they should be able to be negotiated at a reasonable value. We also do understand, and I also this year, that you may well have a long-term contract that then in the end may end up being more expensive than hub prices. And that's always the risk that you take. But we actually do believe that if you have long-term contracts running alongside the hub, because we certainly still maintain our faithfulness to the market, if you will, that you will edge out some of these spikes, which in the end will be for the benefits of the consumers. So this is about market stabilization for us. And so that's why we would see that, in fact, if you are able to have those long-term contracts that are negotiated prices and not necessarily only linked to hub, that we would see an actual improvement in the way that spikes are actually flattened out rather than being so sharp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. I don't know if you have time to stay
yes,
and join the discussion later. Now I'd like to move to our next speaker. Yes? Charles. Sorry. Okay. At the end. So now we go to...
If you want, I can answer the question from Charles, but otherwise I will be here at the end. So.
Okay. So we go with the question now.
Hi, James. Charles Elenas from Atlantic Council. There is talk of gas being included in the European taxonomy. is going to be, and is that going to bring some certainty into the future? Because one of the problems in Europe is this continuous uncertainty about the role of gas in the future. That's one question. The other, do you expect the markets and prices to return back to normality spring next year?
Thanks, Charles. So just to answer the question about taxonomy first, yes, we do believe that there will be a delegated act on taxonomy which will relate to gas. Of this we are certain. What the conditions will be, we are rather less certain about. And of course, the old phrase, the devil is in the details, is perhaps overused, but perhaps is very true for this case. Thresholds have been talked about. So, emission thresholds of around 340, 350 compared to the 100 that were originally proposed. These are probably things that could be lived with. However, if running time is limited to about 700 hours a year, it doesn't make any difference. So if the bundle of criteria are not suitable, it won't really make much difference, whatever threshold they put. Then there's talk about potentially only allowing it for continue to be sustainable if it's replacing coal. So there are many, or oil, I should say. So there are many criteria that could be put into it, which will determine whether or not it is a successful piece of legislation for gas or not. What I would say is that the way that we see things is that there will always be money for gas, and gas will be built. Thus, we do not understand why the European Commission would make the citizens of Poland, of Greece, of Romania, of Bulgaria pay even more for their natural gas infrastructure than they need to, simply by denying a reasonable transitional label for the sustainability of natural gas. All that it does is increase the costs. And that doesn't make sense because you're making people in parts of Europe that don't need to pay more for their energy, pay more for their energy. This isn't a very good idea for a just transition. So we are fundamentally opposed to the idea of limiting the remit only to certain types of energies. We think natural gas should be included because it is going to be built. Why make people pay more for the energy that they need simply through legislation? This does not make sense and is certainly, in our view, unfair. I think then the other point, I just want to tell you, it just started snowing here in Brussels. Will normality come? Impossible to predict. Many reports, including ACER, are saying that by April, things should be back to normal. I have no reason to understand how they can look in their crystal ball and determine that. So here, I will not, on behalf of Eurogas, commit ourselves to any view on when price normality will return, or even to say what price normality will look like on the other side of this winter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, James, once again, for these additional points, very useful. We move next to Dr. Thomadakis, Michael Thomadakis, an old friend and many years spent at the regulator here in charge of gas and deputy chairman of RAE. And currently he is the Strategy and Development Division Director at the Independent Natural Gas System Operator, DESFA. So, Michalis, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, and I hope you can see me also. I mean, presentation.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Kostis, and I'm very happy to be again, although from a different role in this the conference this year. I'm sorry I'm not there to join you in the panel, but I think it will work. I'll take the floor from where James left it, to be honest, speaking about the future more than what is today going on. Of course, we have Gerasimos Savlonitis later on speaking about what goes on today and how DESFA is working for today's market. I'm just going to speak on how DESFA is looking at the future and what are the prospects of gases and renewable gases in Greece, and more specifically in our network. We all know the transition paths may differ depending on how one looks at it. We very strongly believe that the future to energy transition certainly is based and will have to be based also on gas. in a way that is equivalent or, let's say, very strategic also for the future of the power sector. In any case, gas has properties that cannot be set aside. James made a very, very nice and strong points on that, and which I fully support. We have the very important issue of storage, which we cannot neglect. And we have, of course, a massive infrastructure which is already in place and which has taken many, many years for Europe to develop and are still needed exactly to make markets work, as also James mentioned. And I think this should not be neglected, and this should be taken into account for the future. And we strongly believe that this will happen. We have pursued with a study to see, how at least at a high level and let's say as an initial study, which took place in the first half of this year, on how the Greek energy system will look in the immediate future towards 2050. We took into account what is currently in place. We took into account what are the plans of the Greek government for the future. So the Greek NECP, despite the fact that it is already changing. And we certainly see that gas is here to stay, to take, first of all, to take the role, the supportive role of increasing renewable growth, but also lignite phase out in the forthcoming years. And then gas will become greener and greener. We have to take into account that our infrastructure will have to be switched or modified or innovated, or new infrastructure should be built to accommodate greener gases, and gradually to move to the later decades towards what we call net zero, which of course will be based on, to our opinion, also on hydrogen and synthetic and non-carbonized gases. Well, just to make the main points, to our view, of course, we are going to publish the study after we present it also to the regulator tomorrow, actually. It has already been gone through our board, so it's part of a VESFA strategy for the future. According, therefore, to our views and the analysis of the Greek system and the systems around us, gas is going to become more and more important. Natural gas is going to become more and more important for the years to come. Certainly, towards 2030, we are going to face an increase in natural gas consumption. And we certainly hope, and we're working on it, that biomethane will be also becoming more and more existing. Towards 2030, where also hydrogen is going to be produced in significant quantities, but as we move towards 2040, natural gas is going to step down, let's say, or phase out, and especially after 2040. Well, of course, these dates are, let's say, depend on other factors as well. However, biomethane, but most importantly, hydrogen is going to be produced in larger quantities and potentially also exported to a significant extent. And as you can see from our predictions, the overall energy that will be covered by gas will more or less remain the same. And speaking about energy, we forecast a stability there. However, if we speak about volumes, and as we all know, hydrogen needs much more volume to deliver the same amount of energy. Speaking about volumes, we see that not only we need what is in place already. Of course, we have to revamp it. So existing natural gas infrastructure will have to be revamped. We are still currently working on that to accommodate increasing use of production of hydrogen. However, there is a point in mid-30s that probably we will have to have additional hydrogen infrastructure, pure hydrogen infrastructure to be developed and constructed and also sufficient interconnection to our neighborhood so as to export hydrogen. I would like to very much stress the point that also James made earlier. We know from discussions with the European Commission that it becomes increasingly important, which is the issue of storage. Under current technology, let's say evolutions, non-gas storage can only be used for short-term and low volumes. So batteries will not solve the cross-seasonal need for storage. Hydrogen storage is not very appropriate, but only for small volumes and local use. So what is very important is that we somehow develop storage for gas, massive gas storage. James mentioned, of course, the concerns of the Commission, and especially regarding the recent evolutions. Of course, if Europe faces that and countries with storage consider to reopen or increase the use of their storage facilities, we have to keep in mind that Greece has no gas storage at all. And this is an important thing we all have to keep in mind. Our analysis show that not only South Kavala volumes related corresponding to potential South Kavala storage, which is the only potential storage we have already in Greece, gas storage in Greece, will be required, but also 2 or 3 more storages of the kind are going to be needed. The only replicate for that would be to produce more renewables, produce more hydrogen and export more hydrogen. This is something, well, we all have to keep in mind. And I think we are going to do our best as DESFA to convey this message to our, let's say, government and also the regulator, because it's a very important element, and everybody has to know that. If Greece has to go to energy transition, and we are all striving for that, storage is absolutely necessary. So, just towards the conclusion of my speech, what we envisage for our system, of course, the left-hand side is where we stand today, where TAP is also operational since last year. We have already, and White Dragon was mentioned earlier, we are already planning to rehabilitate our system. There is a rigorous study going on, kilometer by kilometer, of our system, how much hydrogen it can accommodate as is right now, or what are the corrective actions we need to take to accommodate more hydrogen when it is produced. And there are very clear signs that it is going to be produced. But in parallel, we are planning toward 2030 to have a dedicated backbone pipeline going from Corinth to Kavala, and which at a later stage may also expand to our neighbors. We already, in the interconnection with North Macedonia, we are discussing with them the hydrogen readiness of the new interconnection. And from this point onward, everything that DESFA is building, and we are building something like 800 million infrastructure, million euros infrastructure, all this infrastructure will be hydrogen ready. And we are pursuing also along many lines. We are involved in all, let's say, renewable gases and hydrogen initiatives in Europe. We are, with the White Dragon, actively participating in the IPCI process, and we are also thinking of other projects. And of course, we are participating in all national and international, let's say, groups that deal with renewable gases. Last but not least, I would like to stress the need for the proper regulatory framework to support all these evolutions. We are very happy to see that RAI is very, very deeply involved in how the energy transition will take place and how they are going to regulate this. We are very happy, and we are very much willing to support that. We also think that it is vital that the regulation starts thinking cross sectors. So we believe that it is a stronger need to go and address regulation across power and gas sectors, including market design and infrastructure development. Kostis, I'm stopping here, but I'm
Thank you
I
very
would
much,
say, happy
Michalis.
to-
Please stay until the end. We have the
I
discussion.
will be also for the next session.
Good. Very, very useful presentation. We now have a very clear picture of how the grid is going to develop further based on the backbone of DESFA infrastructure. The point you raised on gas storage is absolutely essential in developing further the system and, of course, contributing to the security of supply. And personally, and also from the Institute's point of view, we would like to see a lot more work carried out on gas storage. We think it's somehow more surveys should be undertaken across Greece to identify possible geological formations. We cannot just rely on Kavala. Kavala is a very well-known but limited gas storage. We should see more geological surveys trying to identify proper cavities. So now we go to Gina. Gina is, first of all, a friend. She's also a partner of Vienna, joined recently with others as a partner, and she's a very well-known consultant and lecturer based in Israel, but working worldwide. Gina, you have the floor.
So I'm from Israel, so I'm going to give an overview of what is happening in Israel and in the greater Eastern Mediterranean. So as we've seen, the global energy market is going through some kind of what I'm calling a schizophrenic stage. Some countries, mostly in the West, they want to go more towards renewable. The countries in the East are more moving from energy poverty towards coal and towards gas. In my region, in the Eastern Mediterranean, we are moving also quite strongly towards more gas. Although there's a lot of talk about also moving towards renewable, and I personally feel that the talk about moving towards renewable is not necessarily very helpful because the region is not there yet. So what is happening in Israel? We have plans to reduce our coal to zero by the end of 2026. This is definitely achievable and will definitely happen because the country consumes 12 BCM of gas a year, and we have discoveries of 1,000 BCM. So reducing coal is certainly very doable. What is less doable is our goal of reaching 30% of renewables by 2030. We were supposed to reach 10% by 2020, and we only reached 5.7%. The reason for that is because Israel only has solar capacity. We have very little wind, we have no hydro, and solar, although Israel is a very hot country, solar is not that easy because the low-hanging fruit, which can be done in the Negev desert, which is in the south of the country, yes, that is doable, but then to transmit the energy to the center of population where the consumption takes place would be very energy intensive, would be very costly, and to do solar energy in the centers of population, therefore on rooftops, would cost 3 or 4 times the price. It would take huge amount of land, 80,000 dunams, to be able to reach 30% of solar energy. So the new government in Israel, we've got a new coalition government in Israel, is talking about renewables, but they may lead us astray and they may lead us to the same kind of situation that we have in Europe. What else do we have in Israel? So on exploration for gas, so again the ministry is squinting in both directions because the last government was very in favor of opening the sea again for more exploration. This government, the minister just announced last week that she's sitting on the fence and that she's not promoting yet new exploration, and at the same time, while she's not allowing new companies to do exploration, she's also put on hold an interministerial document which came out 6 months ago promoting exports of gas. So there's some quite strong regulations in Israel in place about how you can export, what you have to do to export, whom you can export to. And the new committee 6 months ago said, okay, well, gas is not going to be there forever. There's only a window of opportunity of 20, 25 years to do more exploration and to export what we have and to sort of interconnect the whole Eastern Mediterranean region. And therefore, we must A, remove impediments, and B, facilitate certain issues. And this new minister has said, well, no, I'm not only putting on hold making the discovery of new gas, but I'm putting on hold exploration, and I'm going for renewables. So this whole sort of bag is all a bit mixed up and a bit confusing for everybody. Luckily, something has happened in the last year and a half. We've had the first major company coming to Israel, and that's Chevron. They came through the back door because they bought out Noble Energy. So they bought out Noble Energy worldwide, but they became the operator of 2 major fields in Israel. And we have, throughout the regulation, some of the companies in Israel were forced to sell out some of the gas fields they have. And Mubadala from the UAE, Israel and the UAE just made a new peace agreement last year. So Mubadala, an entity which has assets of $230 billion, has just bought in 22% of the major Tamar field. So this is an NOC, Chevron is an IOC, and we have another independent company, a Greek company called Energean, and they have quite a mid-sized gas field of about 100 BCM, which will come online next year. And they are doing exploration. So they're the only ones who managed to come under the radar, got licenses to do exploration, and they'll be doing exploration in the first quarter of next year. On exports, although many people had their misgivings about Israel being able to export to Egypt and Jordan, this is in fact going ahead better than anticipated. Jordan is taking the full quantity. The quantity is only about 3.5 BCM because Jordan does not need a lot of gas. But Egypt, a country of 100 million people, is consuming large volumes of gas, about 65 BCM a year. And surprisingly enough, although they have major corporations drilling in Egypt, they don't always have enough gas. And they are demanding to import more gas than Israel is capable to provide them. Some of the problems why Israel is not capable to provide as much as Egypt wants is because of A, the infrastructure. The link between the 2 countries only enables to export for now about 4 BCM. And because the third field, the Karish field from Energean, is not yet online, it will only be online in another several months, and therefore the regulations to supply first to the local market. So Egypt is demanding more gas, and Israel is not capable of supplying it. These are, as other opportunities have been missed around the world, this is a missed opportunity. If Israel had not sort of hindered development with all kinds of anti-monopoly regulation over the last few years, then there would have been greater exports, and things have been on hold because of regulation, because of COVID, which is misfortunate. On Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinians. So, insofar as renewable, they are more ahead than Israel. Egypt has about 22.5% capacity. One mustn't confuse capacity with generation, because generation is only about half of that. Capacity means the kind of facilities you have. Generation is what you actually produce. For instance, in Israel, you can build as many power stations that you want on solar energy, but the sun is only at the right angle, at the right strength, 19% of the year. And Egypt is hotter, and Jordan has more land, so they have a better situation than we have. But both these countries have about 12 to 15% generation of solar. Regarding Egypt, it is unlikely that they are going to meet their goal of 42% solar by 2035 or 50% by 2050. Egypt does have hydro, which Israel and Jordan do not have. Egypt does have a lot of gas in its power sector. 90% of its power sector is gas, produced by gas. 10% is by fuel oil. They have no coal, neither in Jordan nor in Egypt. Egypt does use a little bit of coal, but that's for cement, but no coal in power generation. And about 65% of the gas that it has goes to the power sector. Therefore, 65% of the gas that Jordan uses goes to produce 90% of the electricity in Egypt. The Palestinians, well, I've been working on a project for the Palestinians since 1998, the Gaza Marine project, not yet developed. And A, so they have not yet developed their gas field, and B, they've been in negotiations on and off to buy gas from Israel, and this has not moved ahead yet either, so these are our issues which have to be progressed if possible. On emissions, both of pollutants or GHG in Israel, so a great majority comes from transportation. From the transportation sector, we are thinking, of course, of moving ahead on electric cars. So the policies and the regulations are there, and by 2030, all new cars coming into Israel are supposed to be electric, and by 2026, all new buses and heavy trucks are supposed to be electric. So, of course, the old ones will continue, but the new ones coming in. But the infrastructure is not yet in place. That means the grid and the refueling stations and the electricity recharging stations are not yet in place. And it would mean a huge revamp of the electricity grid. It would mean a large increase of residential electricity consumption if people want to recharge their cars at home. So lots of improvements still has to be made on that in order to move ahead on electric cars. So there the government is talking, saying the right things, but not again doing any actions. What is happening on the regional issues? So there are still tensions. One of the major tensions is Turkey, which has in the past acted based on gunboat diplomacy, especially against Cyprus, when Cyprus and Eni wanted to drill in one of the blocks a couple of years ago, or started doing drilling exploration. Turkey, of course, has frictions with the European Union, in NATO. The relations with America are not so good. Recently, we've heard that both Greece and Israel, or Turkey has made openings again with Greece and Israel. With Greece, they're trying to rediscuss some kind of maritime border discussion with Israel. Funnily enough, the détente, or that kind of new détente, came about when Turkey 2 weeks ago imprisoned a couple of Israeli bus drivers who went on Turkey on holiday, and they were caught taking a picture of Erdogan's one of Erdogan's palaces, and they were accused of being spies. They were not spies, and they were put in prison for 10 days, and the two countries started talking in this discussion. So if something very negative, these discussions are leading to some kind of reopening of relations. Hopefully, I mean, I'm in favor of having better relations between Turkey, Egypt, Cyprus, Israel. It would be better. What is happening in Cyprus? Well, again, of course, there's still the problem of the problem between Egypt and Turkey and Cyprus. High electricity prices, as here and in Cyprus, electricity prices are very high. In Cyprus, they're especially high because they have no gas. Of course, this year, having no gas has been a benefit to them, but in the past, they've had very high electricity prices. What is not a benefit to Cyprus is that Cyprus has decided, because it has been unable, because of weak governance, because probably corruption, because of the wrong regulations, because of the inability to push the very big gas companies who are operating in Cyprus. Maybe, in fact, they're too big for their own good, because it has been difficult for Cyprus maybe to push companies like Chevron and Exxon and Qatar Petroleum to move ahead and do the commitments that they were supposed to do to drill and develop. So, although the field, the first field discovered, Aphrodite, was discovered exactly 10 years ago, it has not been developed. And in fact, the companies even got another year of extension before they do their third appraisal well. So Cyprus has decided to import an FSRU, which is a facility to regasify LNG. And in this aspect, they're doing it in the worst possible times, because prices, of course, are at an all-time peak. And therefore, they're going to have to start negotiating to buy LNG from around the world at a very inopportune time for them. Egypt, and also the FSRU has been delayed. They were supposed to be online in mid-2022. It's going to be delayed to 2023. So Cyprus has not done exceedingly well on its import, development, or export of its gas, unfortunately. Other things that are happening in the region, well, Iran is becoming more aggressive towards Israel. Israel is becoming more aggressive towards Iran. The EU is weakened situation because of its social economic problems, so it is less involved in the Eastern Mediterranean and more sort of introspective. So on the global, this was the region, on the global aspect, what is impacting the Eastern Mediterranean? As we heard from Charles yesterday, it is harder to get financing. So both banks, institutionals, bondholders, shareholders are more loath to invest in oil and gas. And so it is harder for the companies working in the Eastern Mediterranean to develop their gas fields because it is offshore gas, it is expensive. We're in the middle of nowhere, sort of 2,000 kilometers away from Europe, 4,000 kilometers away from Asia, so not easy to get financing, not easy to get the gas to the market. The whole aspect of getting gas from Cyprus and Egypt and Israel to Europe, of course we're looking at the Fit for 55 and the Green New Deal and calls by the EIA of develop no more oil and gas, and all these things are not helpful, and the companies in the region have to deal with all that. Nevertheless, there are some things which are happening, and the area is becoming a little bit more interconnected. First of all, as I said, Israel has signed these Abraham Accords, which means there's greater kind of peace between Israel and UAE and Morocco and Bahrain, which is good for the region and certainly good for Israel and good for those countries also. Something else which has happened recently is we know that Lebanon has totally gone bankrupt economically, and they too are in dire need of having gas, of having energy, and they've been unable to discover or develop any of their own potential reserves. They drilled 3 years ago in Block 4, and it was a dry hole, and they have not managed yet to drill in their Block 9, which is on the northern border with Israel, the southern border of Lebanon. But with the intermediary of America, Lebanon is going to potentially get gas from Egypt. The gas will come contractually from Egypt, but the molecules will probably come from Israel, because the way that the logistics of the pipeline are done is that the gas from Egypt goes from Aqaba, goes all the way to from El Arish in Egypt down to the south in Aqaba. That is as far as that gas from Egypt goes as a power station in Aqaba. And the gas from Israel, from the north, goes into Israel, and in Jordan goes north-southwards to 2 power stations in Jordan. In order to get molecules into Syria and from Syria into Lebanon, it will probably have to be Israeli molecules coming from the north into Jordan, going into Syria, and then Syria is going to probably be sending its own molecules of gas into Lebanon. There's one power station in Lebanon called Deir Amar. It's the only power station which can use gas. It is just south of Tripoli, and it is a 400 megawatt power station which can consume about 0.5 BCM of gas a year. So it's not large volumes, but it does show that these countries are becoming interconnected. If until recently Israel was an energy island, we are now connected to Jordan, to Egypt. Egypt's connected to Syria and to Lebanon. So this is something new which has happened over the last year only. Egypt has problems with gas, as I said before. It does not necessarily have enough gas of its own, but bringing gas from Egypt to Lebanon is something of great interest to Egypt. Geopolitically, the Americans are helping. The whole region wants Syria to come back into the sort of fold of the Arab nations, and there's lots of sanctions, American sanctions against Syria, but the gas from Israel or Egypt to Lebanon is going to pass via Syria, and the Americans have given permission for this, and this means that the Americans are going to remove some sanctions, and the Americans are doing this in order sort of to bring back Syria into the fold and to sort of help Lebanon not crash completely energy-wise and geopolitically wise. And Egypt is very keen on becoming an energy hub, and this is another reason why it's doing this, despite the fact that it lacks enough gas of its own, and it wants to import more gas from Israel, but the infrastructure between the two countries for now does not yet permit this to happen.
Up,
okay.
So we can have more time for discussion,
yeah,
please.
okay, well, that's it, that's fine.
Good, okay.
That's fine. Okay.
Gina, that was extremely useful. You have brought to us very vividly the decarbonization, how gas is playing an important role in decarbonizing the economy of Israel, and we can see this actually happening now. So, because in 2 or 3 years, no more coal, all your industry is gas-fired. We see this, as you showed very clearly, huge effect on prices at the time where gas is about $5–6 per million BTU. We have 25 or 30 in Europe. So, and then you also showed very clearly the unifying role of gas in regional cooperation, which is very, very important, and how gas can become a unifying factor. And you can use this geopolitically to a very positive effect. But also, as you hinted, it could also be used negatively. But we think the positive aspects are far more, they exceed the negative ones. And you brought this out very clearly. Thank you. So we now move to Nicholas Satras. Nicholas Satras heads the gas division of Motor Oil. Motor Oil is one of the major energy groups in Greece. And the company moved recently, fairly recently, in gas, but it has an integrated approach, as you will listen now. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kostis. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and an honor to be presenting this very important conference and also to be live in a forum like this one, and not only through internet and through Zoom or Teams. So my speech will focus on the role of gas in the energy mix and the steps that are necessary to safeguard this role, and that would not lead to energy crisis like the one that we're experiencing at this moment. And I believe that it's evident that this model of the global and regional scale has to change to provide clean energy in a secure, flexible and affordable way. Because really the prices that we're experiencing, especially in gas and power in Greece, are not sustainable, and we cannot live with such high prices for very long. Let's take a look of the evolution of the prices in the last couple of years. So from the oversupply in the 2019, especially the second half, we believed that this oversupply would last for at least 5 to 10 years. Very quickly, through a break, the COVID and the lockdowns, where we enjoyed really very extremely low prices, we came very quickly to a lack of gas that was partly due to the increasing demand, especially in Asia and China, with numbers that really were astonishingly very high. And that was a combination of pipeline and LNG going to Asia. All of a sudden then, natural gas became, let's say, the fuel of choice, especially for power generation globally. Brazil, as James mentioned before, had an extremely high drought, so mass volumes of LNG need to go to Brazil. At the same time, we had an extended winter last year, and Europe did not replenish the stocks into the storage. So we had a continuous demand for gas for so many months. And all of a sudden, we think that we have the opposite of oversupply, so we have, let's say, a demand glitch. So what is needed to go further? If we don't take some step forward to take necessary investments and to have security of supply with more infrastructure, more storage, we will continue to experience such price spikes, because if you don't have alternatives, if you cannot do fuel switching, if you cannot rely on your own production, like what happens, for example, in Israel, as Ms. Cohen just explained, then you're stuck to a non-flexible demand, and you just experience the high prices, and you cannot escape. It is true that within Europe, we're not starting from the same point. Northwest Europe, maybe they were ahead of us in many ways, in the use of gas, the use of LNG. We're lagging behind some years. We have not even started the use of LNG in a small scale, like truck loading, like the marine sector. These are important steps to be taken in the next few years for this region. So we believe that there's more need for investment in this sector of natural gas and the small scale in Greece and Southeast Europe. So the lignite phase out that has started, and it was really triggered because of the higher prices of the CO2. It needs to be completed, but it will be lignite as a base load, let's say, for the production of electricity, needs to be replaced by the new power plants. There are already decisions for 2 power plants. One is coming next year, and the other one in 2024. My company, in cooperation with others, is participating to this transition. So we're building high-efficiency power plants based on natural gas. There will be at least 2 or 3 in the next 2 to 3 years. So natural gas will be growing for electricity production, the expansion of the grid that Mr. Thomadakis explained before. Natural gas is going to more and more Greek towns in Patras, for example, in Peloponnese, to West Macedonia. So there is an expansion of the grid, which means that affordable natural gas is needed to go to more regions in this country, and also through the interconnectors to the Balkan countries to be used more extensively. Our proposal to this changing, let's say, landscape on this market is the Origa gas. The Origa gas is an FSRU, a floating storage and regasification unit. Actually, it's a gateway to more flexible gas, and also it's not landlocked to any specific pipeline. So the beauty of gas and LNG is that you are open to the international market where you can really choose your supplier. And what James Watson named before, the long-term contracting possibility, is given partially, but it is given through the LNG contracts. So you may base your LNG contract, maybe on certain hubs the stability is there, maybe with other hubs there's more volatility. But if you have enough storage, and if you have enough terminals to be able to make such agreements, then long-term contracts, to some extent, maybe 50% of your portfolio or even more, can be based on more solid grounds if you have a terminal and you can use your own, let's say, infrastructure. So the Origa gas, it is a gateway to Southeast Europe. It is enhancing the security of supply by increasing by at least 80% the potential storage of LNG. Today we have 200,000 cubes. So with this FSRU, that will be at least 170,000, we will have at least 80% more LNG storage. This can play a vital role when you need, for example, for emergency demand, when there's a very cold winter or there's very high demand in the summer. You will need more flexibility in the arrival of LNG cargos. So it is essential to have more storage in the LNG. It can bring a diversification of the sources. The pipeline gas is coming practically in this region from only 1 or 2 major suppliers. LNG can open really the supplies to every country in the world. You can bring LNG from the US, from Qatar, from Russia, from wherever it can be at the affordable prices. And the big possibility for this FSRU is also the LNG truck loading and LNG bunkering. It's something that will start on a pilot basis next year. Actually, my company is taking steps because we are in the B2B business with LPG and other products. So we wanted to complement the offering to our customers. We're going to start this LNG activity next year. Revithoussa is an island, so the truck loading there will be just to start the business. The Origa gas can bring really very large amounts of truck loading possibilities into the country, and truck loading is also the starting point for many regions, industries, agricultural sector, and cities to build their own natural gas infrastructure and to be served initially at least with LNG. So LNG is flexible. It can also bring natural gas to the islands. So the potential of this FSRU is mainly also the truck loading and the bunkering possibility. Last but not least, this is not a private investment only for us. It is connected to the grid. Actually, we're very close to the grid, and it's an affordable infrastructure. So the distance to the shore is only 130 meters. The distance to the network is only 2 to 3 kilometers. So it is an affordable infrastructure. That means it will not cost to the end consumers, which is always the main criterion for any new infrastructure. We don't need expensive natural gas, but we don't also need very high investments that at the end it's going to be paid by the end consumers. Last but not least, at this stage, we're doing a lot of feasibility studies, technical studies, licensing. We have opened the market test. We see a lot of interest from Greek players, but also from international ones. And I will tell you what a friend of us from the US was saying last evening. They were asking why we're building this next to the refinery. We think that next to the refinery there is possibility. The refinery will be an exporter of hydrogen, and we believe it's going to be blue and green hydrogen by 2030. So it is a massive opportunity to bring hydrogen into the grid. We're also building a lot of renewables like PVs, an electrolyzer for hydrogen and other technologies. So we're applying new technologies. It's actually not the refinery that used to be 20 years ago when I joined this company. So bringing new technology, renewables, and gas into the same region has a lot of potential and a lot of advantages. So we think it is a plus to be making this from a refinery to a holistic energy center in the region. And from this also forum, we invite everybody that is interested in Georgia gas to put their views on the website, to participate in this market test, and make us build a better terminal according to customer needs, because it is a terminal that is being developed by users for users. We're using gas, we're not just developing a terminal, so we want this terminal to be user-friendly. Last but not least, I will not keep you long because I think Mr. Thomadakis said that, yes, regulation is something that we need. It needs to change. It should not inhibit the progress to the new role of gas into this transition. There's a lot of work to do. We'll have to work together, all of us, the regulator, the participants in the market, the gas shippers, and in order to make this market more efficient, flexible, but definitely also affordable for the end users. I will not say more because time is running out, but also I need to stress that time is of essence also for natural gas industry. We need to act now, start building what we need to build. There are a lot of investments from a lot of companies. DESFA mentioned 800 million before. Other investors also want to invest in this country. Let's do it now, quickly, in order to have the role of gas that we envisage. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And we can discuss other questions later.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for this precise and very insightful presentation. We see how motor oil, possessing one of the major refining operations in Greece, in Agithotheri, near Corinth, is taking full advantage of its geographical location and its technological expertise to bring a new LNG unit, FSRU terminal, as it was described. And this complements the activity of the company in gas. In fact, it reinforces the activity. So although latecomer, it's very dynamic entry, very well thought out, integrated approach, taking full advantage of the upward movement of the gas graph as it develops, the curve. And so we wish you all the best of luck. So we have seen a lot of things, what is happening in the region, new projects. Gas is the backbone of growth in energy. and at the same time we have the crisis. And a lot has been said against Russia, that Russia is manipulating this is the main cause of the crisis and so forth, but Russia is very obediently delivering the gas to its customers, as we all know. So what is the issue? So we have asked Andrei Konoplyanik, a good friend and colleague from Moscow, to join us. So we very much look forward to your presentation, Andrei, but more than that, we would like really your views and discussion on this issue. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Stamblis. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. From deep inside Russia, I'm not in Moscow, I'm in the province, in the Upper Volga region, where for the second day, can you hear me? Yes, you can see me and you can hear me, yeah. So where the winter has started, I hope we will manage to survive this winter in this broader energy Europe without fluctuations of the prices like we see in autumn. Professor Stamblis rightly said that I was specifically invited to discuss the issues about recent gas market dynamics in Europe and the factual and perceived role of my country, of Russia. So I would like to pay your attention to the disclaimer that all the views that I will explain here are personally mine and responsibility is mine. So that means if you would like to disagree with some of the observations, you need to disagree with my assessment of these views. So I would like to present my views through three blocks. First of all, I would like to speak about market fundamentals, because the fundamental long-term structural factors, from my point of view, they lie beneath all the recent developments in oil and gas markets. Moreover, I see a lot of similarity between development in the gas market in Europe this autumn and most recent development in the oil market due to this Omicron continuation of COVID, or the developments in the oil market in April last year, when for the first time in history, the prices were going to the negative area. So from my point of view, all these fundamental long-term structural developments in oil and gas markets, they have the common denominator and common explanation for the negative price in oil last year and to the high price in gas market reaching almost 2,000 euros per 1,000 cubic meters later this year. And so I would like, by the way, in my presentation to add some additional facets to the excellent analysis that James Watson was has presented to us. And moreover, in the course of my presentation, I would like maybe to answer the question that Gina Cohen has asked James about long-term contracts and hub-based pricing and how they influence the volatility. So the second section of my presentation, I would like to devote to defining the specific gas market movements in Europe this autumn. And then the third segment, the factual and perceived role of my country. And I would like to specifically address the different understandings inside the European Union and in Russia on what Gazprom shall, I use here the word shall in the international law meaning, yes, an obligation, yes. So what Gazprom shall and what it has the right to do in Europe in the given conditions. So that will be the three pieces of my presentation. So let me start with some fundamentals. We do know that international oil markets, first oil and then gas, has been following the path of development of oil market. They have moved from physical oil market development. And from my point of view, the beginning of this of organizational management of international oil markets started in September 1928 with the creation of International Oil Cartel, a very well-known Seven Sisters. Then in December 1985, with the famous decision of Saudi Arabia to move from cost-plus pricing to net-back pricing, we have been facing the creation of the two segments in the oil market, the further development of the physical oil market and the creation of the paper oil market, which was the part and has been since then the part of the broader financial market. And the financial market has started to develop even before the international oil market was created. So international financial market, from my analysis, was started to be developed since November 1910. Very famous meeting in Jekyll Island, which brings birth in December 1913 to Federal Reserve System of United States. And since that time, the financial market was going a few steps in advance of the oil market developments. But the creation of the paper oil market was based on the structure and by the managers of the financial market. So the paper oil market began to be part of the broader financial market. And since early 2000s, when we have the third step in development of the international oil market. And what are those third steps? At the first step, the oil market was being developed as the physical energy resource. At the second step, as a commodity. And in the third step, as the financial asset. So at this stage, we see the expansion of the new segment of the paper oil market, the financial oil derivatives markets, which is the part of the global financial market. And this segment is much broader in volumes and in value than the physical oil market. And the prices are established here in the financial segment of the international oil market. So the gas has been following more or less the same path. And gas in European Union is following the international oil path with the time lag. So physical gas market has been developed since early 1960s with the development and based on development of the Groningen field and Groningen long-term gas exports contracts and Groningen pricing formulas in these contracts. Then we are facing the development of the commodity stage of this market since 2000s, based on the second and the third European Union energy packages. And when we're speaking about the third stage of development of the market, whether it's forthcoming, whether we are facing it nowadays, this can be discussed, but definitely the development of the European Union gas market is following the same route and the same path as the international oil market, with all the pros and all the contras, with all the benefits and all the negative characteristic features. And one of these negative characteristic features is that the volatility of the prices, which are now established by the speculators, is much more higher than at the previous stages of development of the market, when it was either physical asset, where it was a commodity. So few characteristics of the current state of development of the gas. So we have two segments in gas: pipeline gas, which is mostly regional, and LNG, which is global and which is definitely following the oil path. And in pipeline gas, we have two key regions, which is North America and what I called broader energy Europe. And broader energy Europe is much broader geographical area than just the European Union or the geographical Europe, because it is the area, in my understanding, in my definition, which is covered by the cross-border, immobile, fixed, large-scale, capital-intensive gas infrastructure, long distance. That does mean that it includes all geographical Europe, including European part of Russia and part of the Asian part of my country, where all the gas pipelines are started, like Nadim Portaz or Yamal, yes? It includes Central Asia. It includes Northern Africa, because all these areas are connected with European Union by this gas infrastructure. LNG has been developed from regional market, because the birth of LNG was in Asia Pacific, mostly because there are a number of energy island economies. Now it's being developed to the global LNG market. And from my point of view, this global LNG market was created by the beginning of the US LNG trade in February 2016. And the new pricing mechanism LNG, Cheniere formula, create the background for global price arbitrage. And our colleague and friend, Wolfgang Peters from the gas value chain, has, from my point of view, very cleverly and very brilliantly defined this, that the non-tradable regional price differences between the regional markets of pipeline gas now has transformed through the development of the global LNG market into tradable price differentials. So we're facing today the global LNG market developed by the expanded US LNG trade in result of US shale gas revolution. And there are these distinctions between two segments of gas markets. But there is also another distinction. We are moving from physical gas to the paper gas following the oil path. And we are moving from long-term contracts as an investment tool towards spot market with growing portfolio deals and futures trading. And futures trading present to us price testing. And so we are moving from price indexation formulas in long-term contracts to spot prices in OTC deals, and further on to gas trading floors, price quotations, both in spot and terms deals. And since we clearly can say that paper trades are much more sensitive to perceived developments, to rumors, to speculative news, this is immediately being incorporated in the price fluctuations. But difference between natural gas prices and pricing based on paper trades and say stock market is very important, because paper gas trading inside the European Union, it do not possess now the cutoffs or step trade limits like the stock markets. Because in the stock markets, when the price deviates plus minus 15%, the trading is stopped to diminish the nervousness of the marketplace. And so what I think is important also to indicate here, I decided to exclude, let me say, this multiplication effect to show what are the difference between price and pricing for different categories of players in the market. I present here the simplified versions of this chart because I decided to exclude the time lag, because then maybe it will be a little bit more sophisticated picture. So the simplified picture present also from my point of view a clear understanding that the prices are fluctuating in the market more or less with the same dynamics, with the same wave character. But the waves of spot and derivatives has much broader amplitude and much broader corridor of fluctuations than the corridor of fluctuations of the contractual prices. So that does mean that we have the contractual curve here, contractual supplies with pricing based on price indexation formulas, which has more shallow, more narrow corridor of fluctuations. And we have much broader corridor of fluctuations in the spot deals with either OTC pricing or futures pricing based on trading hubs. And so that does mean that the different players in this market has different price and pricing preferences. What are the preferences of producers or exporters or hedgers? Those players of the physical market, the latter are those players in the physical market who would like to use the financial instrument to minimize the financial risks of their physical supplies. Their interest is to make the price fluctuation curve more shallow, more fluctuating in the more narrow horizon, because they're dealing with the investment, and the long-term investments, they need demand predictability of the prices. So it's not the level of the price that does matter, but it's the predictability of the price that does matter in order to predict the appropriate rate of return of the investments. If we're speaking about consumers or importers, which are colored in red, we see that those group of players prefer the low as possible, so the lowest level of the price. It doesn't matter for them whether we're speaking about long-term contracts pricing with indexation formulas or whether we're speaking about trading hub-based pricing. They would like to prefer to have the lowest price level. So when we do see in the market the undersupply situations, when the prices go high, then the spot or futures pricing go much higher than the long-term contract prices. And in this case, consumers would prefer to take the prices from long-term contracts. They would like to switch to long-term contract supplies. But when we see the oversupply in the market, the price is going down. And so the curve of long-term contracts going down by the curve of the spot deals prices going much lower. And at that moment of time, consumers would prefer to switch from long-term contract supplies to spot deals with the futures pricing. And we're facing this situation in the market. But when we're speaking about speculators, those who are dealing with the paper deals, with the traders who earn just on the reselling of the contracts, their interest is to create the as much broad difference between the upper and the low width of this curve, because the bigger is the diapason of fluctuations of the prices, the more is their earnings. So we see that here today, it's not only the stochastic market, as James has been saying, due to the role of renewables, but it's also very stochastic because the different players has different, let me say, interest in their price behavior. So there were the fundamentals. Now let's speak, bearing these fundamentals in mind, about some specific gas market movements in European Union this autumn. First of all, I fully agree with James. Hot summer increased electricity demand for air conditioning. And this increased electricity demand was not possible to cover with weather-dependent or stochastic, as he mentioned, supply of renewable electricity from wind and from solar, because they are incapable in principle to cover regular demand, especially in the base load curve. So this situation stipulated the increase in fossil fuel-based power generation, mostly gas and, surprise, surprise, dirty coal. Yes? So first of all, this increased fuel-based power generation was needed as a backup for renewables, for unstable renewables, and then as a self-dependent power generation to cover this incremental electricity demand. That, of course, increased demand for gas and coal, that increased prices for them, and that increased the import supplies to the European Union, including from Russia, because it's statistically proven that my country has been increasing its supply, gas supply to European Union. That's the first point. Second point, instead of regular summer injections to underground gas storages, we have been facing long-term offtake from these underground gas storages in Europe. Why so? Because it was profitable today to take off and sell for trades at higher prices these gas volumes that were injected in the underground gas storages under low prices in the past. So this has just worsened the state of the market, yes? And moreover, expectations of future price decline when, for instance, Nord Stream will start, even if partial operation, yes, that definitely stipulated this situation, because the expectation were to use the high state of the market situation and to sell Gulf gas from underground gas storage now, in expectations that when Nord Stream will be in operation, the prices will inevitably fall. That was the second point. Third point, we know that European Union domestic production is in decline in all the countries, including the stopover of Groningen to take place in 2020.
Hold on a minute. Can you please speed up?
Okay.
Wrap up in 1 minute, because we want to have a minimum of discussion.
Fine. Excellent. I will try to do this. Okay. So third issue, decline domestic production. Fourth issue, expectation that European Union is a premium market for LNG. Those failed. So that does mean that Russia became the balancing fuel for European Union. And here we come into the issue number 3, how it is treated, what Russia shall, and let me say, what it need to do. So expectation were that the Russia shall use the short-term benefits in order to supply more gas immediately to the market to gain this short-term interest. But Gazprom works long-term. First of all, it has obligation to, in priority, supply domestic market in advance of winter season to supply gas to its underground gas storages. Second, my question, if European Union needs Russian or Gazprom gas, why European Union harms Russia with anti-Russian sanctions? So where reciprocity is here, yeah? Second, third issue, Gazprom was being forced to deliver gas to European Union via Ukraine transit. But our preference to do this through the bypassing routes, through the semicircle northern and semicircle southern one. I would not discuss in details this picture, but these new pipelines, that provide shorter and less costly opportunity to deliver gas to the European Union, which is in the mutual benefit of both countries. Yes? And I would not like to discuss another issues related to this transit issue. So from that point of view, that's my final slide. From that point of view, if we look to the long-term contracts, as James was speaking about, yes, we see that formula based here, pricing formula, yes, it's diminish the fluctuations of the prices non-dependent. Whether the price here is defined as oil indexation or petroleum product indexations, or whether it's, let me say, hub-based indexation. Today in the Russian contracts, more than 80% are really linked to the TTF, yes? But that does mean that they smooth the price peaks because this indexation formula just diminish the fluctuations of the gas hub quotations. And final point within a Green Deal, and now I would like to refer to excellent analysis of our chairman, Mr. Kostin Sambalis, that was done as late as November 2019. Within Green Deal agenda, the European Union has made two, from my point of view, very important things that worsen this situation. First of all, it's propagate departure from gas, leaving only very short period for transition period for gas, maybe less than 10 years until 2030, which is much shorter than duration of standard investment cycle of gas project, which destimulate the new investment in gas. And then is on top of this introduce direct discriminatory limitation for financing gas, including infrastructure that you, Mr. Stambulis, has very excellently, from my point of view, analyzed in your paper immediately after European Investment Bank has introduced this decision in November 2019. So in sum total, my conclusion is the following. Unfortunately to say this, but current gas prices in Europe is mostly handmade, though with the hands and within mental models of European legislators and regulators themselves. Combination of fundamental things and objective development of the situation in the autumn 2021 has moved us to this situation. So that is the result of my analysis, and the role of Russia there, that it's Russia who is responsible for these prices, from my point of view, is not fair and not valid. I will stop here. Thank you for your attention. Once again, my disclaimer is here, and I'm ready to answer the questions if they will be available and continue this discussion. So thank you very much.
Andrei, we're really thankful for a very clear presentation where you put in very clear lines the position of your country and Gazprom in particular in this crisis. I think the way you have organized this explanation is very commendable in the sense that you made very clear differentiation between the price and the pricing preferences and how gas pricing has now been almost hijacked, I would say that's my own term, by the gas trading or by the trading mechanisms, I mean, which origin is going back many years. So now gas is a commodity more. So if they want a commodity, there are certain price rules there which are not controlled by the supplier. So you made this point very explicitly, and I think this is a basis of the discussion. And please, Gina, can you comment on this?
Yes, if about 4,000 BCM of gas is sold around the world, and on the TTF about 4,400 BCM is traded, so therefore, of course, the way the trades are developing have a strong impact on the gas prices. So I agree with Andrei. It's in 2008, the European Commission has forced Gazprom to reduce their oil pricing and move to hub pricing, thinking it would be more competitive and the prices would be lower. So at times the prices are lower, at times the prices are higher. This is what happens when regulators interfere. They don't always know what is going to be the consequences.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Nicholas?
My comment to long-term pricing versus spot and trading and whatever is happening is yes, the volatility that we experienced the last 3 or 4 months, especially in reaction to news like, yes, Nord Stream 2 is coming on stream, or Russia, or this or that, are not fair for what is happening for the end consumers. Really, we don't like this kind of volatility. This is not a good environment for the expansion of use of natural gas. Even for the small-scale LNG that we used to have a very good response from possible users 6 months ago. Right now, everybody's skeptical of TTF, everybody's skeptical of these financial markets, and they're thinking We don't want to experience this again. So a mixture of long-term pricing, even linked to other hubs or even oil indexation as part of the mix is highly desirable, especially right now. So it's not the fault of one supplier. If we had suppliers of like what is happening, for example, in the other countries where you can control maybe prices or the demand and supply balance is better. To rely only on financial markets and one hub is not a good policy. We need to change the model. This was actually the start of my speech that gas market and electricity market need to change the way they function. Of course, we need to have discussion with our suppliers, maybe extend our supplies not from spot only to longer term. That's why we need also infrastructure, interconnections in the area, and also to move gas more freely through countries. It's very expensive to move gas from one country to the other, and that's a very difficult factor that we need to overcome. Also, we need FSRU as an underground storage, whatever it is. But as Andrei mentioned, some people maybe withdrew gas from the storage because they believed that was the high and the peak. The peak never came, or we're not sure what is the peak right now. So that volatility and this uncertainty is not helping the markets.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think, Andrei, for me, the most useful aspect of your presentation was the complete deconstruction of the notion that the supplier, like Gazprom, is manipulating the market. I think this is very clearly came out from this because it's not just something that has been happening now or happening in the market, but has its origin back to the design of the market and the choice, as you very well said in your last remark, the choice, it's a choice by the European Union to actually adopt the commodity approach to gas pricing and to oil pricing and to all pricing. Therefore, here we have a situation where on the one hand, you must, the governments, if you like, through the representatives in the EU, they want a fully commoditized market. And on the other hand, they want security of supply and stable prices. But you cannot have these two things. Can you comment on this? Can you please comment on this? I mean, it's like Gina, when she started her presentation, she had a very interesting slide, which was called schizophrenic, right? So we have a schizophrenic approach now to prices. On the one hand, the governments do not really know what they want when they are calling for stabler prices. I mean, if they're calling for stabler prices, they actually are asking in another way, please change the market structure. So can we have a final comment on this?
Yes. Thank you so much for these questions, because I think you have very correctly made conclusions from my messages. Definitely you use the word manipulation, and that Gazprom is not manipulating. And that's a fair point, because manipulations means a short-term actions, immediate short-term actions. Gazprom is working long-term. Why so? Because as any company that has been heavily investing in upstream production, there is no reason, no economic stimuli, no economic motivation for manipulate, because that will depreciate, that deprive the predictability of the payback of the investments. So that's why my company is going in the long-term vision, in the long-term corridor, and all these fluctuations are for the detriment for its activity. That's why all these indexation formulas, non-dependent, whether it's oil indexation, whether it's hub indexation. That's the first point. Second point, very important, that Mr. Safras has mentioned, I think, in reference to your question. About interconnections, about free flow of gas inside the European Union, etc., etc. I do know very well the program of the Commission on the development of the network codes to the third energy package. The major aim of those was to diminish any barriers inside the European Union's own borders between the member states, so to provide the free flow of gas, and that means that interconnectors capacities need to be there, reverse flows shall be there, etc., etc. But as you, Mr. Stambulis, has presented again, I would like to refer once again to your comments on the decision of the European Investment Bank and further decisions to stop investments into gas infrastructure, the ideas and the plans and the activities of the previous commissions to make these flows free within the European Union were not finalized by the current European Union Commission, which has changed the priorities. In the previous Commission, the priorities were by the regulatory actions to make the free flows of gas inside. Today, it's Green Deal, which is stop these developments, and so there is no opportunity for free flows of gas. And that was one of the results of this gas crisis.
Okay, I think we should bring this session to a close. Thank you very much, Andrei, for this wonderful presentation, very detailed, thought-provoking. And I'd like to thank all other speakers, you, Gina, Mr. Nicholas, Michael Thomadakis, James Watson. Thank you all much for your contribution. Okay, bye-bye.